Now we'll talk a bit about the reading science on which the SoundStart literacy program is based. This background information will prepare you for the instructional approaches used in the lessons. To understand how we learn to read, we need to start with the brain. When we're born, our brains are wired for language. Babies hear their parents speaking and they eventually speak too. That's because oral language is a biologically primary function. We acquire it just by interacting with our environment. But reading's different. It needs to be explicitly taught, and there is no one reading part of the brain. To read, we use different areas of the brain that were intended for other functions. We hear and distinguish speech sounds, understand language, integrate the sounds we hear with the visual representations of those sounds, and we store words for instant retrieval. For some students, this is a relatively easy learning process, but for others, it requires a lot of repetition and practice. Given that reading needs to be explicitly taught, where do we begin? The simple view of reading is a model that shows the basic components needed to comprehend text. We must be able to decode, meaning that when we see letters in a word, we need to be able to associate each letter with a sound. The letters B-A-T are linked to the sounds B, A, T. And then we need to be able to blend the sounds together to read the word bat. We also need to have language comprehension, which is knowing the meaning in different contexts. Notice the simple view is an equation that uses a multiplication sign because anything times 0 is 0. Both decoding and language comprehension are necessary components that students need in order to successfully comprehend text. Dr. Hollis Scarborough built on the simple view of reading by creating a graphic called the reading rope. This was created to explain how essential language skills work together to develop skilled reading. The lower strands of the rope show word recognition and some of the components necessary in order for students to be able to recognize words quickly and automatically. They need phonological awareness, decoding strategies, and understanding of phonics, and they need to be able to recognize words by sight. We also have the language comprehension, or the upper strands of the rope. And this deals with oral language and an understanding of things like background knowledge, vocabulary, language structures, verbal reasoning, and literacy knowledge. These are all things we're going to get into in more detail in future parts of the video training modules. Since the reading rope graphic was originally created, more research has also been done about the role of executive functioning in reading comprehension. Now, what we mean by executive functioning is our ability to control our thinking, sustain attention, think flexibly. Our working memory is also part of this. And so later on, as there's been more research, Dr. Scarborough also has written about the role of executive functioning, and there have been many more studies done since the reading rope was originally published. But that executive functioning piece is also critical when it comes to successful reading. How do we know so much about effective reading instruction? Well, reading is one of the most researched topics. Given the state of our nation's literacy, in 1997, Congress commissioned a group of 14 literacy experts to review the decades of research and report their findings. In 2000, they issued their final report, which outlined 5 key components: phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. Now, the research is ongoing, and we're always learning more and adding to what we know about good reading instruction. We know that writing is also something that is important and should be connected. So what we're going to do is go over a sort of brief overview of each of these 5 components. We'll also talk about writing along the way because that's something that we also know is critical in terms of building literacy with students, that reading-writing connection. So we'll provide a brief overview of each of these areas that were defined by the National Reading Report. We'll begin with phonemic awareness. This is the ability to hear, identify, and manipulate individual speech sounds, called phonemes. Now, as I said before, this isn't something that we naturally do, because when we speak, we don't speak in individual sounds. We just speak in words. And so as students are learning to read and spell, this is something that isn't really natural. They need to learn to take a word and break that word into the individual sounds that can be spoken. And this can be really challenging for many kids. An example of this, for instance, would be the word clap. So when we say the word clap, we don't really hear distinct speech sounds. So we really have to help kids be able to tease that apart in order to be able to connect the letter with the sound eventually. And so students do need to be able to take the word clap and hear it as clap. Now, the way we do this, the way we build phonemic awareness, is through the act of teaching reading and spelling. That's the way we do it. Phonemic awareness is not a prerequisite skill. It's a skill that comes from teaching reading and spelling. So students don't need to master phonemic awareness before you teach reading. Phonemic awareness will improve as you teach reading. We have 3 phonemic awareness skills that are critical: blending, segmenting, and phonemic manipulation. When students first begin reading, blending and segmenting are most critical. So what we mean by blending is being able to put those sounds together. If we have a child that's looking at the word map, that child will need to be able to put the sounds map together to get map. Now, some students have great difficulty doing this. They might give you the individual sounds like map and then say pat. It gets sort of mixed up in their brain, sort of like alphabet soup, and then they give it back to you and it's completely different. So we will be addressing some of that later on about how we can support students who have difficulty with blending, but blending is a critical skill. Segmenting is also a critical skill. We need to be able to do this in order to spell. As I said earlier, it's not natural to speak in individual sounds. It's not a natural thing for our brain. When we speak words, we speak the whole word. So you might ask a beginning reader, what are the sounds in map? And the student will say map because they can't hear anything other than the whole unit, the whole word. And so we have to teach kids how to break down the word map into those individual phonemes, map, in order to be able to spell. And then we have phonemic manipulation, which just involves taking sounds out, putting sounds in. So an example of this was if we had the word map and we asked the student change to t. What's our new word? Tap. And this becomes more important down the road when students are learning that one spelling could have multiple pronunciations, such as the grapheme EA. It can be E, it can be it can be A. And so if a student comes across a word that they're not sure how to pronounce, they have to be able to take sounds out and put sounds in order to successfully decode the word. Next, we have phonics. Phonics involves connecting the speech sounds, the phoneme, with the letter or letter combinations, which is the grapheme. So a grapheme is just a visual representation of a speech sound. A grapheme could be a single letter, like the letter S. It could be 2 letters, like the letters SH. It could be 3 letters, like the IGH in the word light. It can even be 4 letters, like the EIGH in the word wait. So the grapheme is just that visual representation of the phoneme or the speech sound. And phonics is really the connection. It's the marriage of those two. So if we're asking students to spell, what we're doing is we're starting with that sound or that phoneme. So for instance, if we have the word snack, we're starting with the sounds S-N-A-K. And so in order to turn that into the written symbol or the grapheme, we're now going to write the letters S-N-A and C-K to represent the spelling in the K in snack. So when we go from the phoneme to the grapheme, we are spelling. We also can go in the other direction when we're reading or decoding. So when we are looking at a word, if I'm looking at the word snack on the page, I then need to do the reverse. I need to look at that grapheme, turn it into the phoneme. So it would be snack and blend it, snack. So phonics instruction involves going in both directions. We need to be able to spell, which we call encoding, where we're going from the sound to the grapheme. We need to be able to do the reverse and go from the grapheme to the phoneme when we're reading or decoding. Next, we have fluency. And fluency is the ability to translate print to speech accurately and automatically. So in order to do this, we have accuracy and we have rate. So first comes the accuracy. We want to make sure students are accurate. They understand letter sound correspondences. And so this is critical that we need to have the phonemic awareness in place. We need to have an understanding of phonics in place. If that isn't there, we won't be able to get to fluency. So students need to have the accuracy, and then we can move on to increasing the automaticity and increasing the reading rate. And then fluency will come from there. We also have prosody as part of fluency. And what we mean by that is our intonation, our expression, and our appropriate phrasing. Now, this is not something that's going to come right away. This is going to come once students have become accurate and their rate begins to increase. The prosody is also going to increase, but it's also something that we do need to explicitly teach to many kids. Some students will naturally include that as they're learning to read. Others will not. So it's just something that we want to keep in mind, that fluency involves accuracy, it involves increasing that reading rate, and it also involves prosody. Next, we have vocabulary. Vocabulary is a large storage of words that a person recognizes and or uses in his or her oral and written language for communication and comprehension. Now, as students progress with their reading, vocabulary becomes more and more important. This is because at the early stages of reading, unless a student is an English language learner, much of what they're reading is in their oral speaking vocabulary. So if a student is learning to decode very simple words like dog and cat, they know what those words mean unless they're learning English as a second language. As students move throughout the grade levels, vocabulary becomes more and more challenging as they get exposed to new content. Now, even though vocabulary knowledge can be a huge issue for students, even if they're quite good at decoding later on, we also want to be building vocabulary with our youngest readers. So starting really even in preschool, we constantly want to be building students' vocabulary, which also involves increasing their background knowledge and teaching them about the world, so that when they're older and they're in third grade or fourth grade, they have a large bank of words, they have a lot of background knowledge and exposure, and that vocabulary will then help them as they encounter more challenging texts as they go throughout the grade levels. And finally, we have comprehension, which is the last portion identified by the National Reading Panel report. And comprehension is the understanding and interpretation of what is read. Comprehension is different, though, than the others because it's the result of all those other skills. It's the result of strong word recognition, fluency, vocabulary, background knowledge, language ability. It's all of those other pieces. If we kind of go back to that reading rope and we think about Scarborough's reading rope, there was no strand for comprehension because comprehension was the outcome of all the other strands working together and then increasing the automaticity and the fluency, which will then eventually lead us to comprehension. So again, comprehension is not a skill in itself. It's the outcome of all the other sub-skills that were identified by the National Reading Panel report. Now, there are some strategies we can use to support students' comprehension, and those are some things we will discuss later on in the videos. But all of these pieces are important. All of these strands of the rope are important in order to have the result or the outcome of strong reading comprehension. While our focus is on developing word-level reading and spelling, Sound Start literacy includes all aspects of literacy: speaking, listening, reading, spelling, vocabulary development, writing, and reading comprehension. Here's an overview of the program's goals. Explicitly and systematically teach the alphabetic code, build automatic word reading skills, teach proper letter formation and spelling, teach multisyllabic reading and spelling strategies, build background knowledge and vocabulary, teach comprehension strategies, teach sentence level writing and mechanics. First, it's important to understand that English is a morphophonemic language. This means the code is influenced by both meaning and sound. Let's take a look using an example. So we'll look at the word locked. Locked is composed of two morphemes, or meaningful units. So we have the base word lock and the suffix ed. If we want to spell the word locked, we need to be able to break the word locked into the phonemes. And in this case, we have 4 phonemes or speech sounds: l, a, k, t. But in order to correctly spell the word locked, you need to know the graphemes L, O, C, K represent the sounds in the base word lock, l, a, k. But you also need to know that the suffix ed can be added to lock to show that it happened in the past. Without an understanding of this morpheme, you may spell the word locked, L-O-C-K-T. When we teach reading and spelling to students, we need to include both phonics, which is that letter-sound relationship, and morphology, which means teaching about prefixes, suffixes, roots, and base words. Let's start with the phonemic aspect in that morphophonemic language structure that we just talked about. As we said in video 1, oral language is natural for the human brain. We're wired to do it. So it makes sense that we start our instruction with what's natural. Kids come into our classrooms with oral language. So a speech-to-print approach means that we begin with oral language or an oral pronunciation. For instance, we have a picture of the word dog. So we would start by connecting the word dog. I like to always show pictures because that's helpful for students, especially English language learners. So we want to always connect the meaning with the oral language. So we can begin with a picture and we can begin with oral pronunciation. Then we ask students to segment the word orally. So we're going to take the word dog and we're going to segment dog into those sounds d, a, g. Next, we're going to take those sounds and we're going to turn them into visual representations that we call graphemes. Now, in this case, we're using single letter spellings in the word dog. So we would use the letters D, O, G to represent those sounds d, a, g. We ask students to say each sound aloud while writing each letter. This facilitates the orthographic mapping process, which is the process we go through in order to take a word that maybe is a new word that we haven't seen before and turn it into a word that is in our memory. We can have instant retrieval. We look at dog, we say dog, we don't have to decode it. So that's the orthographic mapping process. It helps us really store those words for long-term memory and instant retrieval. And finally, the students can read back the word that they spelled. So this is what we mean by a speech-to-print orientation. We begin with speech and we turn that speech into print, and then we can do the opposite and we can kind of pick that print back off the page to read the word. By using a speech-to-print approach, we reveal the alphabetic principle to students. And that is, our writing system is a code for speech sounds. We represent the sounds with letters and letter combinations, again, that we call graphemes. We can explain to small children that letters are just pictures of the sounds we say. By teaching this, we help build students' phonemic awareness, which is the awareness that our words can be segmented into individual speech sounds for the purpose of reading and spelling. To read and spell, a child must be able to segment cat into the sounds k, at, and then represent those sounds with the letters C-A-T. A speech-to-print approach helps us reveal the alphabetic principle to students in a very natural way that makes a lot of sense to them. The basis of our code begins with oral language. Now, in an alphabetic writing system, we need to be able to take words and segment them into sounds so that we can connect the sounds with the graphemes, which again are those representations of the different sounds. Now, in the English language, we have between 40 and 44 speech sounds, and that's going to depend on dialect. Certain dialects, depending on where you live, will actually have fewer sounds than others. We also have 26 letters in our alphabet, but there are over 200 ways of representing those sounds, so over 200 graphemes. Now, this can be daunting for both educators and students, thinking about having to teach all of those different graphemes. But if we use a structured linguistic literacy approach, we can really orient all of our instruction around teaching the code based on those 40 to 44 speech sounds. So it's a much more manageable system and an easier way to organize instruction. The 40 to 44 speech sounds in the English language can be broken up into two different types of sounds. We have consonant sounds and vowel sounds. Consonant sounds are what we consider obstructed speech sounds. So that means something's getting in the way of the airflow. It might be the lips, the teeth, or the tongue. For instance, if I'm saying the sound as in mat, my lips are blocking the airflow. If I'm saying the s sound, like in the word snake, my teeth are blocking that airflow. If I'm saying the word king, that sound at the end, my tongue is blocking the airflow. So something is blocking the airflow in that consonant sound. For the vowel sounds, they're what we consider open sounds or unobstructed speech sounds. So our chin will drop and the air will flow. If you think about singing, I was someone who always participated in choir and loved to sing as a child. We always warmed up on an open vowel. Often we would say ah, or we would say the ah. So something that was really open, especially the ah, which is the most open sound, allows you to really just hold on to that sound. So we have a variety of the sounds. When we orient our instruction, we orient the instruction around teaching the different sounds. We begin by teaching the initial alphabet with the consonant and what we consider the short vowel sounds. We don't necessarily use the language short vowel. There's the common vowel sounds, but those sounds of those are the first vowel sounds we begin with, along with the initial alphabet. And then we'll move on to two-letter consonant spellings, the digraphs, often referred to as. So we have sounds like ship and chop and that have two letters that will represent one sound. And then we have a variety of vowel sounds. So when we get into all of the different ways of spelling the vowel sounds, that's when we're working in what we call the advanced code. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but you can see all the different examples of the vowel sounds. So beginning again with those short vowel sounds, moving on to the long vowel sounds, which are the same as the letter names. We have diphthong vowel sounds. That's when we have sounds that sort of slide into each other. So if we have the word house, the ow sound, your mouth actually moves when you say ow. You're kind of having two vowel sounds that blend in. Boy, the oi sound, oi, your mouth moves when you say it. Then we have some other sounds that are not really long sounds or short sounds. We have the and the oo and the ah. We have the R-controlled sounds, or the vowel plus R, where we have a vowel followed by an R, kind of distorts the sound. So we have the and the or and the R. And then we have something called the schwa sound, which usually sounds like an or an And that sound is created when we have words that have more than one syllable. When we speak multisyllabic words, one of our syllables will be accented or stressed, and at least one of the syllables will be unaccented. So I'll give you the example of banana. If you look at the word banana, we have 3 letter A's in banana. But when we say banana, if you really slow it down and listen to it, banana, banana. So the first A is a schwa sound. We hear ba, and then we hear the sound in the second syllable, ba-na, and then we hear an again in the final syllable, banana. So the schwa sound is really that distorted sound. Any vowel can represent that schwa sound we see in all different types of multisyllabic words. So that's actually the most commonly spoken vowel sound in our language. And it can be a little bit confusing, especially for spelling. Remembering which vowel to use, which grapheme you're going to use to represent that sound, that schwa sound in a word, can certainly be challenging for students. In order for students to understand how our alphabetic code works, we have a few principles that not only we need to know, but we need to teach to our students. So the first principle is that sounds can be represented with 1, 2, 3, or 4 letters. So in this example, I have 4 different words. They all are words that have the I sound, but they all have a different number of letters to represent that grapheme of the I sound. So in the word buy, the grapheme representing the I sound is a single letter, Y. In the word pie, the grapheme is IE. So we have a 2-letter spelling to represent I. In the word light, we have the grapheme IGH, and that's representing the sound I using 3 letters. And then in the word height, we have kind of an unusual, uncommon spelling. We have EIGH that's representing the sound I, and we're using 4 letters. So a grapheme can actually be 1, 2, 3, or 4 letters. And again, a grapheme is something that is representing a sound, and it can be anywhere between 1 and 4 letters. Principle 2. There's variation in the code, meaning that most sounds will have multiple spellings. So here's an example of different ways that we can spell the O sound. And there are always going to be those sort of unusual, uncommon spellings. Sometimes it might be the only spelling that represents a word. We tend to not really address those unless it's a high frequency word, a word that students will see all the time, then we're going to include it. But for the most part, we're focusing on the spellings that the students are going to see that are more common. So in this example, we have the single letter spelling O in go, the OE in toe, the OW in snow, the OA in boat, the O with an E or the VCE spelling, or as we call it, the split vowel spelling we'll talk about later on. And then we have the OUGH, which is less common, but we do see that in words like though and doe. Principle 3, there's overlap in the code, meaning that some spellings can represent multiple sounds. So if we look at the OW in the first example, OW can represent the O in snow or the ow in cow. OO can represent the oo sound in moon or the sound in look. The EA can represent the E sound in eat, the S sound in bread, and the A sound in steak. And these are just some of the more common ones. There are others that we would explicitly teach to students. Now we'll shift gears from focusing on the sound symbol relationships to focusing on the meaning, or the morpho in morphophonemic. It's clear to anyone who's learned English that we have a very challenging spelling system. It's often referred to as an opaque orthography because of its many complexities, which are caused by 3 main things. As I already mentioned, multiple spellings for a single sound, morpheme structure, and word origin. So let's unpack morpheme structure and word origin. First, we'll look at morpheme structure. Morphemes are the smallest meaningful units of language. They include prefixes, suffixes, roots, and base words. These morphemes can create challenges in our spelling system. For instance, when we write the word jumped, we hear the t, but we spell it with the ed because ed means already happened. Another example is the word nation. When students are learning early on about the sound sh, they learn about the sh digraph. So many of our beginning readers and spellers would spell the word nation with an sh. But the word nation is actually comprised of a root, nat, and a suffix ion, which is how we end up with the spelling nation instead of nashon. So you can see how this can be pretty confusing for students as they're learning the sound symbol correspondences and then also bringing in the morphology to help them understand why we're using certain sounds and symbols. Another example is the prefix pre, sometimes pronounced as pre or pra, depending on the word. Now, when we have the word predict, we hear an sound, predict. That would be an example of that schwa sound because the pre in predict is the softer or the unaccented part. So we spell predict pre, not pru. So again, students need to not only know those letter sound correspondences, but they also have to have an understanding of the morpheme structure because that's going to heavily influence how we spell words. Understanding morphemes also helps us with syntax. Syntax is a system of rules related to how we organize and use words in sentences. We have different parts of speech like nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs that have different functions or jobs in a sentence. If we take a simple sentence like the cat sat, that's an allowable sentence structure. The cat is the subject, which includes a noun, cat, and sat is the predicate, which includes a verb. Now, I wouldn't be able to say the sat cat. That wouldn't make any sense because it doesn't follow the syntactical rules of English. Now, one challenge in English is that many words can be different parts of speech. So adding and deleting morphemes can change the way a word is used in a sentence. Now let's take a look at the word wish. In the first sentence, I made a wish. Wish is being used as a noun, and a noun as a person, place, thing, or idea. In the second sentence, I wished for a dog. The word wish has the suffix ed and is the verb or the action in the sentence. And then in the third sentence, it was wishful thinking. Here we've added the suffix ful to the word wish. Now, by adding this suffix, which means full of, it changes the word into an adjective, which is a describing word. So wishful thinking, wishful is describing the word thinking. The awareness of morphemes in words and how those words can and can't be used in sentences can help students when reading and writing. Throughout SoundStart Literacy, you'll see activities related to morphology and sentence syntax. We include specific activities that teach morphology and sentence level writing skills, which help students understand the internal structure of words and how those words can be combined to create meaningful sentences. Finally, we have word origin. Modern English has developed and evolved over the course of about 1400 years. Over that time, other languages have influenced English, resulting in many spelling complexities. This pyramid shows the layers of the English language. The first layer is the Anglo-Saxon or Old English layer. This is the oldest layer of English and consists of everyday words like bird or chair, and these are often one-syllable words. They also provide us with many irregularly spelled words like said. These words had pronunciations that changed over time, but the spellings remained the same. Then we have our Latin layer, and this is comprised of a large percentage of words that are multisyllabic words, academic words, words found in literature, textbooks. They contain many common roots and affixes. And what we mean by affixes are prefixes and suffixes. Then we have our Greek layer. And many of our math and science and medical words come from Greek. We also see some different spellings, such as the PH spelling for the F sound in words like telephone and graph. We have the CH spelling for the K sound in words like chorus or Christmas. We also get some words from the French layer. So words like soup, where we have the OU spelling for the U sound, and the CH spelling for the sh sound in words like chef or chandelier. We borrow many words from all kinds of languages, which often bring unique spellings, such as the word ski from Norwegian or pizza. As you can see, we have many different complexities that are caused from the word origins changing over time, and it's something that's continuing. So we're always borrowing words from other languages. As new technologies are invented, new words are also created. So this is something that adds to that complexity when students are learning to read and spell in the English language.